Welcome back. We had some questions that we discussed in the last break, there are a couple of them that have to do with other substances. So one of the first questions was, what does it look, when someone is self-medicating, does that look like abuse? Or does it look like dependence? And the answer is it can. Whenever it comes to someone's relationship with their drug of choice, we have to look at things on a continuum. So one of the ways I've tried to talk about the continuum is use, abuse, and dependence. When someone is self-medicating, they're going to be in the first 2/3 of that continuum of use and abuse. And what we're going to see is the individual managing whatever they're self-medicating, whether that's physical pain, emotional pain, social anxiety, a difficult life, whatever that would be. They want to keep a level of anesthetic in their system. They want to keep a level of numbness in their system. Where it moves over into dependence is when the individual is having a relationship with the alcohol or substance as if it's a real being. So often we'll talk about the loss of the use of alcohol or their substance as the loss of a best friend. Or spouses will say, it's as if my spouse is a mistress, that there's the relationship with me, and then there's the relationship with the mistress, and the mistress is the substance of choice. When I'm listening for, is this dependence, is this abuse, and we don't have a full picture of what the physicality of the use of the need for the drug of choice is, I listen for the relationship. So for the next 45 minutes, we're going to be talking about how to have the conversation with an individual about their drug or alcohol use, and we're going to come at it from the side of what is the relationship that you're having with this? Because we're asking the individual not just to give up their anesthesia, but to also to give up their best friend, that thing that is so reliable, that thing that is God with skin on for them. I can put it in my mouth, I can drink it, I can feel it, I have a relationship with it. It does everything it promises it will do for me, everything. And so if I let that go, what happens to me then? This is why the spirituality component is so important when we're talking about working with someone in recovery. Another question that we had at the break was, what about marijuana and legalized marijuana and medical marijuana and all the different forms of marijuana? Combined with, what about opioids? Because opioids are prescribed for pain management. What do you do for someone who has chronic pain? So the short answer, because it's a whole nother day of conversation, the short answer is medical marijuana has been genetically designed to attend to the pain system in the brain. So medical marijuana, when it's going to be prescribed by a doctor, is going to come in pill form or in liquid form. It is not smoked. And the purpose of medical marijuana for pain management is for neuropathy, which is when the nerves in the body fire and the pain centers in the brain are awakened. It's also prescribed for chemotherapy and cancer, pain from cancer, but it's pain management. There are a whole bunch of things there are a bunch of links on cdc.org, cdc.gov, about marijuana and its various uses. And what I'm concerned about in terms of marijuana is there are strains of marijuana now, back in the day when nobody my age was actually using pot, wink wink, the THC levels were much lower. And the reason people were using the way they were using was very different from what's happening today. So in today's marijuana use, we have a strain that helps an individual, putting this one in air quotes, helps an individual have clarity of thought. We have another strain that an individual will smoke or eat in order to relax. That's the groove. That's the kind of feeling of being high. And then we have all sorts of oils and edibles, and then we have medical marijuana. I've just done a continuum here, and I don't mean it from abuse to dependence. I just mean these are the different categories of pot that we've got today. What I'm concerned about is that there are folks who will be smoking pot that they buy from their dealer, whether it's this strain or this strain, and they'll say to themselves, this is medical marijuana. It's helping me feel better, it helps me manage my anxiety, it helps me with clarity of thought. And I want to be very clear that that is not medical marijuana, that's pot. That's being used for a specific outcome, and usually it's mood altering, and usually it has to do with management of anxiety or depression, or often people will say that they have ADD and that the one strain of pot use, the clarity inducing strain, manages ADD. And I'm going to tell you that a side effect of pot is ADD and anxiety, so that when an individual tries to smoke less of it or use fewer edibles, the withdrawal symptoms that we look for is an increase in attentional issues and an increase in anxiety. And so often the person who's smoking pot for those uses will say, no, it's the only thing that manages my ADD and it's the only thing that manages my anxiety, when really what we have here is a loop, a circle of behavior, and the anxiety and ADD are exacerbated by the pot use. And the individual who's smoking, because their understanding and their perceptions are skewed by the pot use, can't see that, where those of us outside of their individual system can see that they're being impacted significantly by the pot use. Opioids, obviously, are prescribed for pain. And doctors, the AMA is working very hard to shift their relationship with prescribing opiates and the number of pills that they'll prescribe or how many refills. And so most doctors will say, doctors who work with teeth or anything dental will say that if they don't prescribe the opioids, they will lose patients, because patients are so afraid of pain and have been taught that having a tooth pulled or having wisdom teeth managed, most doctors will tell you that 1 or 2 pills of opioids are necessary for that, but then after that you can move into other medications that are not addictive. And folks don't believe that, and they're afraid of pain. And there's been so much marketing to us consumers to talk to our doctors about name of medication, that we now believe what the advertisers want us to believe, and that is that we can be treated better by having a certain pill prescribed to us. The time that opiates become an addiction, the time that we see that the relationship shifts, is from I take it as prescribed and I take it only when I need it for pain, and it shifts over to how the individual begins to ingest the medication. So rather than taking a pill, there are other things that an individual will do in order to change the delivery of the medication, or they'll start to go to different doctors, they'll doctor shop in order to get a different prescription. And then what we find is that opiates, OxyContin, Oxycodone, all of those are gateway drugs to heroin. Heroin costs less and is easier to get than opiates. And opiates and heroin are opiates. So this leads me into, what do you do when you are holding a function in your parish and you've got your identified folk who are troublesome or who you're worried about, or who you really hope the evening isn't going to go too badly with them, and they come in and they insist, I have not had anything to drink, this is my first glass of champagne, all is well, I don't know what everybody's worried about. If we were to kind of rewrite the tape of their last 2 hours, we'll see that there has been an ingestion of pot or marijuana, that they may not have had any alcohol, but they may come preloaded for the event. And so the other sticky place for all of us is when we have these conversations that the General Convention has asked us to have, and we focus on alcohol, we give an opportunity for an out when the individual says, well, that's not the only thing I'm doing. And they're rarely going to say to us, that's the only thing I'm doing. Usually they're going to say, I haven't had any alcohol today. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know why your experience of me is that I seem off, or that my game is off, or that I seem numb, or I seem disconnected, or I have no motivation. I didn't drink. Okay, but I'm not going to. But this stuff is okay for me. I don't need to tell you about this. What we know is when you add alcohol on top of those things, the experience, the inebriation happens much faster and at a much deeper level. So I'm going to bring us back to the relationship the individual has with their drug of choice. Is it a best friend? Is it the confidant? Is it the one thing that understands me? Is it the one thing that I know I can turn to and I will always have the same experience? That relationship and the intensity of that relationship is what defines addiction when we move away from the physicality of the symptoms. One of the questions I'm asked all the time is, does sobriety require abstaining from a drug of choice? And I'm going to tell you, and I'm hoping that the room is lightning proof, sobriety does not require abstaining. Sobriety is an act of maturation. It's an act of maturity. Can people attain maturation without being sober? Do they have to abstain from their drug of choice? I will tell you, if there is dependence, the body requires it. The individual can't have one of whatever the substance is. They have one of whatever the substance is and they finish the bottle, or they finish the pills, or they have to front load their experience with that substance. That's dependence. And that individual probably will not be able to ever use again, because there is no stop button. There is no, it's time for me to finish this. Like, I need to be done. When we have use and abuse, the individual could probably, dial it back to, once they understand the dynamics in play and they understand how the substance is serving them in their lives, they can drink every once in a while, but they may have to have a lot of rules and regulations around it. So Dr. Perrin's rule of thumb is, if you start and can't stop, you're done. That switch has been flipped. Ism is ism. Which brings us back to the individual is the one who's going to end up choosing what kind of relationship they're going to have with their drug of choice. Is it going to be a divorce? Is it a disavowal of the substance? I can never have you again. I love you. We've had a great time together, but I can never, ever have you again. That really is up to the individual. There are more people who can go back to drinking solidly, comfortably, once or twice, one or two, a week. But they have to do a lot of work around, what are my social engagements? How do I manage my anxiety? What do you do when life is too realistic? How do I put other things in play in my life so that alcohol isn't the only thing in my life? Where is my significant other than my alcohol? And so for you all, whoever has these conversations, it's important that you not have the expectation that because the individual says they want to get better, that they never drink or drug again. The time that never drinking or drugging again happens is when the individual has such a relationship with it, physically, emotionally, spiritually, that once they start, they can't stop. When they start and cannot stop, even once, that's when we have addiction, and that's when we have a person who cannot go back to using again. Now, one of the other questions at lunchtime was, this person heard back in the day that even one binge night in a year, whether that's New Year's Eve or the time that the family's gone, one binge equals addiction. And I said, it does not. It does not. We have a society that pathologizes, and it is much more, it's much neater for all of us to have something be labeled as an addiction and then you can never ever do it again. That makes it easier for us. It doesn't necessarily make it easier for the individual who's in a relationship with it. So a one-night stand with alcohol or drugs, a one-weekend stand with a substance of choice does not equal addiction. It equals a one-night stand or a one-weekend stand. Now, when we see a weekly weekend event, then our antenna needs to go up. When we see a daily one-night stand of abuse, then we definitely have addiction or dependence, and we've got to attend to it. So does sobriety require abstaining from alcohol use? Abstention is abstention. Abstaining is abstaining. Abstaining is not sobriety. Abstaining is not using. And so what we're left with then is, where are my relationship needs met? How do I manage my anxiety? What do I do with those things that I cannot tolerate in my life? What do I do with the unwinnable, unfixable, broken things in my life? How do I live with those? When an individual begins to address that, that's sobriety. So, how do you get to sobriety? Accountability. So in the beginning of the day, I talked about how accountability and integrity were drawn together. I glossed over integrity. Integrity is that when I tell you I will do something, you know that I will do it. Integrity says, I don't need to be watched by someone else in order to do the right thing. Integrity says that I am predictably predictable. And integrity says that I do not feel shame when I show my face to you. How do we get to integrity? Accountability. So accountability is when the individual looks at, they do an inventory, they take an inventory of their lives. If we say to them, we're really concerned about how you're drinking and drugging, we're really concerned about how you show up to some of our events at church, we really just want to be present to you and want to be available to you and talk with you about your experience. What does it mean for you? Help us understand your relationship as you understand it with the substance of choice. You'll note that I just laid out how to have a fierce conversation. Let's talk about it. Help me understand your relationship. Help me understand what it means to you. Help me understand why you use it. Sobriety, accountability is, I know this to be true about myself. And sometimes the only way we know this to be true about ourselves is if we get feedback from other people. And a sticky place is, what happens if I give you feedback about you? Uninvited, unasked for. How receptive are you? How able to hear it are you? Depends on the individual. How I give feedback about what it's like for me to engage with you is a very different thing. How I deliver it can open up room for the individual to hear what's going on. And it opens up room for the individual to hear what I have to say, which doesn't mean the individual has to act on it. But accountability, all of us live our lives going forward, and we can only see who we are and who we've been by looking backwards. And that's what an inventory is. That's what accountability is. Who am I? Who have I been? It's the same thing with God. Most people can only recognize God with 20/20 hindsight. Right? Most people cannot see God in the moment unless they've already done the 20/20 hindsight exploration. They can say, I feel in this moment, in this event, and what's happening to me right now, I feel the way I felt when I was 15 and that thing happened, and I've learned to identify that as God being present in the moment for me. So I feel that way right now, so I'm going to infer that God is present in the moment for me right now. That's how we learn where God is, how to experience God. That's when we learn God's dialect, God's language for us. That's when we learn how we felt God's presence. But we can only do it with 20/20 hindsight. Believe it or not, that's easier for folks to access than, who was Melissa in 2010? Who was Melissa during that really horrible event in 2002? Who was Melissa back in 1968? And those choices that were in front of her. How do I get to that? How have I made the same choice over and over and over again for the last 40 years, since 1968, even though it gets me in trouble every time? That is inventory. So I talk about inventory with folks, and I say, back in the day, when I got my first job, everybody else was given a car, and I was not given a car. I worked in a shoe store and a movie theater in order to make enough money to get a VW Bug, which was my favorite car of all. And I worked in a shoe store, as I said, with people's smelly feet. And the thing that I learned about the shoe store was inventory. My boss would close the shop. We would close the shop for the day. And all of us would come in and we would take inventory. And the point of inventory was not what shoes you had. It was the shoes you didn't have, so that we would know what shoes to order. I had no idea back when I was 16 that that was going to be a life-changing experience for me, because inventory is, what do I have and what don't I have? What do I need? Where are the empty spaces that need a shoebox? And then what kind of shoe is in that shoebox, right? What's the inventory that we need? So what's required for sobriety is, what do I know about myself? If I know that I can't eat Oreos without finishing the entire bag, what else do I know about myself? Well, I know that time for me is fluid. And I work really hard to be on time, and I'm always 5 to 10 minutes late when I'm getting someplace. And I've learned not to answer the phone, and I've learned to shut a conversation down, and I've learned to map out where I'm going. I've learned all of these strategies, so I'm no longer 40 minutes late to something. I'm only 5 to 10 minutes late. And I know that that irritates some people, but for me it's a success compared to who I'm capable of being. So inventory. What are the things that I know that I get in trouble with? And then what are the things that I'm fabulous at? God gave me the gift of oration. Can you tell? And thankfully, I have a job where I get to talk to people, and I get to teach people, and I get to give epiphany moments, and I get to give pithy statements, and then better, I get to learn from your questions, and I get to learn for the next thing that I get to talk about. That's amazing. I've just give you an inventory on what I'm good at. Accountability says, I know where my strengths are and I know where my weaknesses are. Another way to say that is, I know where my strengths are and I know where my learning curves are. Where are my learning edges, my growth edges? That's sobriety. When we talk about sobriety, we talk about self-knowledge. Shame management. I'm sure you all know that guilt is I feel bad about something. Shame is I am bad. I am bad. What we find when folks get into recovery, when they get into sobriety, is that they are rife with shame. That when they are drinking or drugging or using or anesthetized, they don't realize that they're not wearing a coat of many colors, they're wearing a coat of poop. And when we take away alcohol or drugs, and they look around and all of a sudden, oh no, it is my coat full of poop. I smell bad, I look bad, no one's going to be with me when they find out what I'm really like. It was better to think that it was a coat of many colors, but instead it's a coat of poop. That's shame. And so it's a lot of times when we talk with someone about, I'd like you to stop drinking, or I'd like you to think about not drinking or drugging, or we need to change how we relate around this particular substance, we're asking the individual to suddenly have 20/20 foresight, hindsight, sight, and a really good nose. Because shame, when folks have been anesthetized or inebriated, or they have missed functions or been in functions or not been able to participate in functions, or the alcohol or the substance has loosened their tongue and they've said things they would never say when they were sober, ever. And society will return and say, yeah, but you were thinking it, because if you weren't thinking it, the alcohol wouldn't have loosened your tongue. That's not entirely true. The brain is under attack by alcohol and the individual says something, it isn't necessarily something they actually believe, but it is something the brain spits out. The amygdala does that. Shame management. A big portion of managing shame is, let me tell you who I am. So for those of you who work a 12-step program, steps 1 and 2 have everything to do with, this is the behavior that has been out of control. Shame, out of control life, unmanageability. And 2 is part of that, because in order for the individual to say, this is how I've been out of control, the individual has to have a level of, there's something bigger than me going on. Often they're only aware of alcohol being bigger than them. But it morphs into higher power. And steps 2 and 3 have to do with, am I lovable as I am? Am I going to be taken care of? This is standard attachment. Step 4 is inventory. Who am I? What's the truth of me? If I look at me with 20/20 hindsight, here's the truth of me. Step 5 is when we get into shame management. If the individual has been doing this with a mentor or a sponsor all along, the individual has been talking about the pain that they're remembering, the things that are going on, and hopefully they're being received with, that's okay, I did that too. Or that's okay, you should go talk with, or yeah, we all do that sometimes, don't worry about it. Or, hey, let's go back to this thing over here and study this. But usually it's let me connect you with someone in the rooms. And that's been happening steps 1 through 5. That's shame management. And the message usually is, you're okay. You're really no different from the rest of us. All is well. Steps 6 and 7 have to do with how do I live my life going forward differently from what I learned about myself with 20/20 hindsight. There's a shift of locus of control and a shift from shame into, if I live my life with integrity and authenticity going forward, even if it makes people angry or upset with me, I have traction. Step 8 is about forgiveness, self-forgiveness and forgiveness of others. Step 9 is more shame management. Let me tell you the truth about me. But it has that silver lining, that coat of many colors of, let me tell you what I know about me. Let me tell you about how I know I hurt you. Let me tell you what I've been doing to make sure that I don't do that again. That's the magic. Let me tell you about what I'm doing so that I don't do it again. Step 10 is I keep doing those things. Step 11 is I come back to God, higher power, and I make sure that I'm in God's presence every minute is what that step is. And then 12 is let me share with the people who need to hear it. Let me share. The 12-step rooms are not the only place you can get that. They are, however, one of the few places where it's organically in place, and there's a living, breathing community of people who know how to tolerate what it feels like to move through all of that growth. And all of that growth has to do with accountability. So again, Accountability, shame management, they come together. Accountability manages shame. Exploration deepens shame. Accountability manages shame. More exploration, accountability, integrity. When an individual knows who they are and how they've been living with 20/20 hindsight and how they want to live differently, that's when we get integrity and accountability. The 12-step rooms are not the only place. The other place that they can find this is in a parish. The 12 steps are built around the Oxford Group, which was a Christian-based organization. And most of the structure of the 12 steps have to do with the structure of Christian life, even the Benedictine strand of Christian life. And so a person does not have to go to the 12 steps. They can get it at church or in other supportive groups. Mood management. Life is really real. It's really realistic. How do I manage my emotions? Part of being in a group or being in a community or being in a family or a 12-step group is I'm having a really hard day. So I have a dear friend who's in his 90s who works a 12-step program, and there was a period in my life when my whole life had exploded, like someone had dropped a bomb in my little pond and fish were flying up in the air and horrible things were happening, and I would see him in my office halls, and I would say, and my friend Everett would say, "Melissa, honey, how are you?" And I would say, "Oh, Everett, terrible, terrible day, terrible. Oh, it's really, really bad, it's terrible." And he would say, "Oh, honey, I'm sorry to hear that. This too shall pass." And then a week later, I would see him walking down the hall. We'd be getting our cup of coffee, and "Melissa, honey, how are you?" And "Everett, it's a fabulous day. Oh my gosh, things were so bad last week, but they're so much better this week. Oh, honey, I'm glad to hear that. This too shall pass." Really vital life lesson. Vital. Delivered with love, a hug, a laugh. This too shall pass. There are a number of cliches that are found in the 12-step rooms, and they're all really powerful things. But this too shall pass, mood management. This too shall pass. In my work, we talk about there's the personality, and that's the world that the individual lives in. That's the air the individual breathes that is created all by itself in the world. And then there are the clouds that scud across the sky, and there are the lightning thunderstorms, and there's the beautiful blue sunny sky, and that's mood. Changes by the hour, sometimes by the minute. That's mood. And so for us to know, again, when we're about to confront someone and say, I'm going to ask you to take a deeper look at something you have a significant relationship with, we're actually kind of lifting a lid on that individual's world and saying, we have to know that things will pass. I'm about to ask you to do a really hard thing. It's going to be okay. This too shall pass. When we set ourselves up for the conversation, when we prepare ourselves for the fierce conversation, what we know to be true, how we understand the world, informs how we have that fierce conversation. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Am I My Brother's Keeper Part 2. Feelings and ownership, part of the fear that people have with the confrontation of let me tell you this thing that I need us to talk about is how are you going to respond to me? How are you going to kick back? If my fear of how you're going to kick back stops me, I have to do my own work. I have to work with my own support system in order to be ready to have that conversation. And then I have to allow you to have your experience. I have to allow you to have the emotional response that you have, even if that includes yelling at me and calling me names. That's part of your experience. What if I'm afraid that if I confront you, I'm going to ruin the party? What if my community, whatever community I'm part of or representing, we have an unspoken or spoken agreement that we are going to live as we want to show a happy face to the world, we want to get along with everybody, even if we don't like this person or this person over here is dying. We're going to pretend they're not dying so that we can continue to present a face to the world. And this is when communities blow up because someone gets caught for acting out in some way. Everybody turns a blind eye or everyone is afraid to approach something. So what happens with your own anxiety and your own willingness to push through whatever discomfort is going to come from having the conversation? And then what's my investment in communal practices? So we were talking at lunch about the chalice and how to introduce a second chalice with non-alcohol in it. Or what to do with gluten-free wafers versus cake versus bread that is handed out. There are these conversations of we've always done it this way, or we don't want to change, or fill in the blank. So and so is going to be upset. When the altar was turned forward, how many parishioners did you lose? When the door was painted red for the second time in 70 years, when it had been white for so long, but red is the door of the Episcopalian Church, how many people did you lose? How many times do you lose tithing because of a decision that you've made? People vote with their feet, with their voices, with their money. When you buck the system, when you say, I understand that it would be more comfortable if we don't say anything, but I'm worried here. Or we have to do things differently in order to include everybody. Or we have to do things differently in order to make this a safer environment. Or we want to do things differently because we've given the message that this is how you manage social lives. That in order to be social, we all have to be inebriated in some way. Can we take the risk of not being inebriated with each other? Can we take the risk of having fun with each other just the way we are? So, the idealized family. I've been talking about family off and on throughout the day, and I've talked about family, right? Husbands, wives, children, parents. I've talked about church as family, the family system. I could even talk about Evanston, which is the town we're in, as a family. Again, I'm back to what is it about church life that empowers these conversations, that I can encourage you to rely upon when you take the risk of changing, that I can encourage you to rely upon when you take the risk of talking with someone about their relationship with a substance. An idealized family, this is impossible to find in the real world, although there are two places where I can tell you can find it. Assist in developing belief systems, assist in developing value systems, and codes of behavior. What comes to mind? Church? Yeah. AA meetings? The idealized family collects and disseminates information. Here's what you do when you're in trouble. Here's how you handle a situation that you don't know what to do about. Here's how I handled it. Maybe you can handle it that way. I don't know how we're going to handle this, but I know we're going to figure it out together. That's how we're going to handle this. It's a feedback and a guidance system. Whoops, well, that was a mistake. Let's try not to do that again. And when we're trying to figure out how not to do that again, let's review what decisions went into that, and maybe we can make a decision sooner or differently. It helps members understand their own reactions to others and to the reactions of others. So when you begin to make a change and you get some pushback, we don't want it to be this way, or when you begin to talk with someone about, I need to have a conversation with you about your relationship with this substance. I'm worried about what I see. Help me understand. Help me understand how you understand your relationship with this substance. Now, when I say it that way, does that sound anxiety-provoking? When I say, help me understand how you understand your relationship with this substance, what's the likelihood that someone's going to kick back and say, you're overreacting? There's not a lot of overreaction there. What's the likelihood that they're going to say, it's none of your business? That one could happen, but then we could say, I know, but I'm just wanting to understand your understanding. Like, where is this for you? What does it mean for you? Because when we're at a church function and you have already had some, I'm afraid to give you more because I'm worried about what I see. And if you've already had some, I don't want to add to what you've got because I'm worried about your safety. Or you tend to go off and sequester people in the corner and grill them inappropriately, asking them personal questions about their lives. When you only have a couple in your system, you don't do that. But when you have more than that, so I want to keep the community safe. Nodding heads, raising hands, does that feel like something you could do? Does it feel less anxiety-provoking than, we need to talk about your alcohol use? I think you're an alcoholic. That's a really different conversation, and it is not in someone's face. It's help me understand how you're living your life. I've set these 3 hours up with the idea of, if we can understand an individual's choices, why does this make sense to them? If it makes sense because that's the way it's always been, that's one conversation. If the next answer is, it makes sense to have this kind of relationship with this because I don't know another way, boy, that's a conversation to have. How about, I've always done it this way and I don't know how to stop, and when I try to stop, because trust me, I have bugs crawling on my skin and I can't tolerate that. Or I'm afraid I'll have a heart attack because my blood pressure goes up so high. Or I have been drinking for so long and in this way, I don't know how to be a different way. Those are 5 different conversations that can come from help me understand how you understand your relationship with. You'll note that I front load it with, I want to partner you. I want to understand you. I follow it with, here's what I see happen in our rooms and in our community, in our gatherings, when you have more than 1, 2, 3. The individual might push back on that one and say, you count how many drinks I have? Well, yeah, that's what we do when we love each other. And then the third piece is, and I'm concerned about that person's well-being, your well-being. How do I work with you on this? Whatever that conversation brings, whatever happens next, remember that you have just opened a Pandora's box that's been opened before for this person about what I'm going to do with my moods, what I'm going to do with my memories, what I'm going to do with my shame. How do I change my life? What if I can't change my life? Should I come back to church? What if I feel shame that I bring with me? You might not have shamed me, but I feel shame. Can I come back to church? So the other thing that we want to front load this conversation with is, I care about you. If I love you, I'll tell you that. If I care about you, I'll tell you that. If I don't like you very much, but I need my community to be safe, I'll choose my words carefully. But it is important that each individual know that they matter for themselves. Whatever your language is, whatever you choose, each individual matters for themselves. Each individual is important because of who they are. And sometimes, even when we have a confronting conversation, we can help people understand their reactions. I'm sorry I upset you. My intention was not to embarrass you. My intention was not to harm you. My intention was to talk with you so that we can all be in agreement, safe, understand each other. And then, how do we help them kick into something else? If alcohol, or whatever their drug of choice is a lower higher power, a finite, confining, harming higher power, something that they turn their will and their life over to regularly, using 12-step language, but that has a damaging outcome for them, it's the abusive spouse that they return to over and over and over again. Well, what do we have to offer that counters that? So I'm talking to a group of people who have an awful lot to counter that abusive spouse that they turn to. What is the nature and the meaning of the universe? What is the nature of my place in it? If I am someone who's been coming to church for 20, 30, 50 years, and I've been coming with anesthesia in my system, and it's been a purely intellectual exercise for me, because that's what we do when we're too afraid to have an intimate relationship with God. It's purely intellectual. And then suddenly, someone throws a bomb into my pond, fish are flying up in the air, and I have to figure out how to live differently. How can you retell me the stories in a different way that approach me today? How can you make those stories matter to me in my pain, in my ability to sit in jail and sing Andrew Lloyd Webber's "Close Every Door to Me," right? Joseph, how do I sit in my time of pain knowing that angels are nearby, God is nearby, the people in my community love me? Prove it. And then the paths he should strive to travel in his life. Serves as a guide and mediator for problem solving, which this church does with a good harvest, right? It's the feeding the hungry, feeding people who need food. There are ways that we can work social justice into helping each other one by one. Provides material aid and concrete services, offers a haven of rest and recuperation, serves as a reference and control group. What do other people do when they don't come to these parties inebriated? What do other people do when they face a chalice and they don't feel like they should drink from it? Provides the foundation for personal identity and assists each other in the task of emotional mastery. Religious institutions offer an idealized family experience if they can do it gently and well, and the 12-step rooms offer that same thing. The other rooms that are available for people with drug and alcohol issues do not offer all of the idealized family ability, which is why I put them together. Those are the two organic places. Church is an organic, idealized family. And so I offer this to you because I want you to have a template. I want you to have a frame, a structured frame that you might be able to pull from when it comes to these conversations. Again, the resolutions say to us, these are the conversations we need to have, these are the things we need to explore. We have to be open and available to it. Well, how do we do that? The good news is the resolutions have been really clear. Point by point, beat by beat, here is what we're doing. By the way, we're following the baptismal covenant. Flipping it over into a different structure, however, if we, on our own, open our own minds to what's my goal? Why am I having this conversation? Is it because I'm your keeper? Is it because I'm worried about you? Is it because you're someone who scares me and I'm in a leadership position and I have to confront you? What's my goal? I have the general resolutions. Dr. Perrin has told me how to do it. The bishop thinks it's important. What's my goal in talking with you about how you understand your relationship to this substance? And by the way, I might have chosen the wrong substance. Alcohol might not be the thing that's the problem. Your oxys, on the other hand, might be the thing that's going to kill you. And the oxys might be the thing that you took before the party, and then you came and you had 3 glasses of champagne, which happened to really be magnified in response because of the oxys. But it might not be alcohol, but that's what I see. So that's what I know to ask you about. But it could be these things. You must ask yourself, what's my goal? What is the outcome I hope for? And then that really difficult act of, and I have to love you enough to let you decide about your own life. What is the quality of life that you want to have? What does a healthy life mean to you? It might not match my definition. Can I love you enough to let you live life the way you think you should live life? Caveat, liability. If I serve you 6 drinks during an event at church and you get in your car and drive home and get into an accident, I'm responsible. So I can love you and I can let you all make your life choices, and I've got to assess my liability. And then I have to make my choices based on what liability I'm willing to accept. So we've talked about Eucharist, and I've talked a little bit about the fundraising and the festivals and how we spend time with each other. And it is important that communities assess how much wine do we consume, how much alcohol. Are we Whiskeypalians? Are we Episcopalians? If there are 4 of us together, are we all going to drink a 5th? Or are we going to do something else with each other? I've been talking about how when you begin to think about how you're going to be together as a community, these are some questions I want you to bring forward to your leadership or to your planners. How do we engage in fun and ritual but change long-standing tolerance of alcohol abuse in our community, in our family? How do we use adult forums or adult education or kids education and bring forward, hey, let's explore the relationship we have with this? What does my community require? Who is the enforcer of action? There's always someone in the group who says, and I'll bring the wine. Or, what? We need to have this one thing. Pay attention to that, because it might be that the person who you need to have the conversation with may not be the one who overindulges. It may be the person who enables, who colludes, who brings the substance, who says, we can't not have this. And that individual may not have a drinking problem themselves, but may be very well conditioned in their family system at home, or their childhood family, or their relationship with, I need to make sure that everybody's anesthetized, because then I can hide best that way. It is a two-way street on who's hiding and who's anesthetized. And then, is there a middle road, or does my community need to change everything? Always the middle road. Always the middle road. Finally, boundaries. It is an act of love to have boundaries. When someone pushes back, or they say, you need to help me with this, or they pull on your relationship with them, your side of their relationship too much, it is an act of love to say, you may not have any more alcohol tonight. It doesn't matter how much you've had. It matters that you are weaving as you walk down the hall. It is an act of love to set a boundary. Boundaries let everyone know where safety lies. And by the way, when we get angry, that is one of the ways that we know that a boundary that we had in place was violated, and we might not have even known that boundary existed. But when we can go along, and all of a sudden, oh, that is not okay. That lets me know that a boundary that I didn't even know I had was crossed, and then I've got to explore that. What is it that happened there? No is not a starting point for negotiation. No is a complete sentence. No, period. Complete sentence. You don't have to have more conversation about it, and it doesn't start negotiation. Communal agreement, use the agreement. We have a communal agreement in our resolutions. That's a communal agreement. Bring it down to the smaller community that you live in. See if you can have some agreement. And then fierce conversation. The first conversation is fierce. All conversations after the fierce conversation are authentic. How many people have been to the Fierce Conversations classes? So they give you a beach ball, and they talk about stripe. And the blue stripe is from the top of the ball all the way down to the bottom of the ball. And all the other stripes doesn't have that full stripe. And so they'll talk about your vantage point is the blue stripe, because you can see from the top and the bottom and then your stripe. But the thing is, I may see from the top and the bottom, but I don't know what the red stripe's experience is, because it's on the other side of the ball. And so a fierce conversation is when we talk from each of our stripes, and I have the courage to hear what your stripe holds, what your silo holds, what your experience holds. All of us have that conversation. It's a fierce conversation, and they use the word fierce because it requires courage. And it requires the rawness of the vulnerability to say, here's what my experience is, I can go no further. When people have a fierce conversation like that, it relays the groundwork. It changes everything. It's just, now I understand where you come from. I might not understand you. I might not agree with you. I might not like you. But I understand how you're experiencing what we're doing together. Every conversation after that has one about authenticity. Given the new contract, a fierce conversation is a new contract. Given the new contract in which all of our experiences matter, everything after that is about authenticity. And thank you very much for your attention and your questions and all of the comments from earlier today. And that is the presentation. Thank you.